we're hosting today. My name's Jason Johnson. I'm with the WhyTry organization, and we are thrilled to be able to be participating in this. We've got two very great guests that are thought leaders and experts on two of the topics that I think intersect in a really important way. So what I'd like to do, I like to just get right into it. I'm going to introduce both of you, and then we'll just kind of jump into it. We'll treat this kind of as a panel discussion. I'll throw questions your direction, and then I just love to hear a conversation about some of these things that we're going to talk about today. So we are thrilled today to have with us Mr. Quincy Natay from Chinle Unified School District. I'm just going to read a little bit about your bio, see if I can embarrass you just a little bit. Mr. Natay grew up in Chinle, Arizona, and we're going to have him talk a little bit about that community more in a minute. After finishing his K-12 education there, went on to complete a bachelor's degree and then an MBA. He understands firsthand the benefits of education, and he's dedicated his life to creating those same opportunities for generations of Navajo students attending Chinle Unified School District. You've been there 23 years in school finance, led many construction projects, including working on the Wildcat Den, which some people may have seen featured recently in the Netflix series Basketball or Nothing. I happened to be in Chinle the weekend that series dropped, and it was so cool to see how proud everybody was of that. He's now in his 8th year as the Chinle Unified School District Superintendent, where he's successfully led district staff in developing strategic planning processes that have created pivotal strategies and made historic changes in student achievement, where they've begun to close the achievement gap. And it's resulted in student pass rates on the Arizona State Assessment, more than doubling in both ELA and math between 2014 and 2019. Which is just an incredible accomplishment for what he's done to support that community there. And we're thrilled to have him. Welcome, Mr. Natay. We're so thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you, Jason.
Then in addition to Mr. Natay, we've got Christian Moore, internationally renowned speaker, licensed clinical social worker, advocate for youth, also the author of the Resilience Breakthrough and founder of the WhyTry program, which is a social emotional learning and resilience curriculum that's been around for about 18 years. We're in all 50 states. We're over in the United Kingdom. We've had the opportunity to do a lot of great work, and Mr. Moore has impacted the lives of literally millions of kids through his advocacy work and through his understanding of resilience and social emotional learning. So welcome, Christian.
Great to be here.
And then
Mr. Natay, it's awesome to be here with everybody, man. It's an incredible group.
Amen. As I mentioned, my name's Jason Johnson. I'm a school psychologist. Been with the WhyTry organization for about 5 years, and I've helped out. I oversee training and research and development, and thrilled to be able to moderate these discussions. This one today, I'm really excited about. It's a communities being represented that I think is pretty close to several of our hearts here at WhyTry. We've been able to do some work in Chinle and get to know a lot of the community members there, and it's a community that really I think has our heart. And so we're thrilled to hopefully be able to amplify their voice and their story a little bit. Before we get into any discussion points, Christian, anything you want to add on our relationship to the Chinle community?
Well, I just want to put a little more plug in. I know you introduced Mr. Natay, but I've had the opportunity to be there several times, meet many people in the community there. I know, and I meet a lot of superintendents in the work I do, and he is a greatly loved superintendent, has had a huge impact in that community. And I know my whole organization, everybody that has gone to Chinle, been involved with Chinle, with Mr. Natay, their lives come back literally changed. Now, we travel, millions of miles, and there's 2 or 3 places we go that we don't come back the same. We're greater human beings because of it, and that's why I'm so excited for this webinar. I just want to kind of say that right out the gate. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, let's jump right into it. I think one of the best ways we could get started to help provide a little bit of context to the discussion is, Mr. Natay, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your community there, help the people who haven't been to Chinle understand a little bit about your community there, and then tell us what resilience means to you, and feel free to weave in your own story and your own experience there, because I think it's probably at this point pretty tough for you to separate, because this has been your life's, literally your whole life's work there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, Jason. And I just want to say thank you to the WhyTry program and, of course, Christian Moore for that shout out about Chinle. I'm going to introduce myself in Navajo first because, you know, that's what we do. She'e Quincy Natay in She'e Kachini Shlon Twitchini Bashishchin Maide Shkijni Ada Shache China Sitna Jini Ada Shanala Chinle Dan Nasha. And so what I said is in Navajo we have 4 clans, our maternal and paternal clans. So I am red running into the water, born for bitter water people. My maternal grandparents are Coyote Pass people, and my paternal grandparents are Blackstreet people. And so I am from Chinle. I'm a local product. Proud to say I'm a graduate of Chinle High School. I'm a Wildcat alumni. Just to kind of describe where Chinle is located. So if you go to the map and you go to the Four Corners area, we're located in the northeast corner of Arizona in a small community in the center of the Navajo Reservation. And so what's some of the unique things about the Navajo, Arizona doesn't practice daylight savings time, but on Navajo we do. And then in the center of the Navajo Reservation is the Hopi Reservation. They don't follow daylight savings time. So you can literally lose and gain an hour as you drive across Navajo into Hopi back to Arizona. But we're a small community. I have a district of the size with 3,600 students, 99% Native American, 98% Navajo. Our district encompasses 4,200 square miles, and to kind of give you an idea of the vastness, every day in a normal setting without COVID, we transport over 6,000 miles a day. And so we're a very remote community. You know, the state calls us rural. I say we're remote. We're isolated out here. And so, but despite all those challenges, you know, we've been able to see some amazing work here in Chinle Unified School District, and that goes out to my team. It wouldn't be possible if I didn't have a really high functioning team, a team that's really ingrained with the work here. So that's a brief description of where we are. And I want to also let you know, go to the map and you'll see a national park. It's called Canyon de Chelly National Monument. It should have been one of the 7 wonders of the world, but I'll call it the 8th wonder of the world. But anyway, if you get a chance, come out and visit. It's a beautiful place to see. And so, Jason, to your question about resilience, what does it mean to be resilient? Well, you know, you think about being a Native American and knowing what's happened with Western expansion and tribes being relocated and moved all over America and their lands taken away from them. In Navajo, back in 1868, they experienced the long walk. And so here in Canyon de Chelly, this is one of the areas where Kit Carson rounded up the Navajos. They went into the canyon, burned all the orchards, all the plantations, and rounded up the Navajos. And we were moved to Bosco Redondo. And so that's where we were taken as Navajos. And basically we had to walk. So, you know, if you couldn't keep up, you were shot. If you couldn't swim, you drowned in the Rio Grande as we crossed. And so we went home. And so what happened while we were there is the Navajo leaders at the time, they got together and they were going to move us to Oklahoma. That was the plan. That's what the government wanted to do, is move us to a reservation in Oklahoma. But our leaders stuck to their, you know, they said, we want to go home to our 4 lands, our homelands. And so we're located within 4 sacred mountains, one in Colorado called Mount Blanca, Mount Taylor in Grants, the Bensaw, or one in Durango, the La Platas, and then of course Flagstaff. Flagstaff Mountains is the 4th mountain. So that's our homeland. That's our area. And so they said, you know what, we're gonna take whatever they give us, even though they're minimizing our land base, but we're gonna say yes, send us home. We want to go home. And so we were allowed to come back to our lands. We're one of the very few tribes, if not the only tribe, to be allowed to return to their homelands and regain a lot of their lands that are in place. So that to me is the beginning of resilience. We may have already had it as a Native tribe, but the ability to withstand that adversity, that travesty that they had to deal with, the tragic losses that they had to deal with, and come home and be able to reestablish themselves on Navajo. And so we are the only tribe with the largest landmass based on that. And their plan was, let's go home, we'll take whatever the government gives, and we'll slowly regain our lands. And that's what they've done. They've increased the landmass here back to almost not quite what it originally was, but we have a huge landmass here. And so the ability of my ancestors to have that foresight to say, you know what, we'll go back home. As long as we're home, we're okay. We're inside our 4 sacred mountains, and we'll live and prosper. And so, now we're one of the largest, if not the largest tribe in the United States. I think we're slightly behind the Cherokee Nation. So that's one example of resilience, the ability to bounce back despite what happens. You may face negative. It's like COVID-19. I'll use a modern day example. We were the hotspot in the United States based on, per capita. And again, with our leadership on Navajo Nation president taking action and some of the protocols and best practices we've put in place, we've been able to get our numbers down under 50. And we've been staying there right now. And so, yeah, we have curfews. 8 o'clock is a curfew every night. We have weekend curfews, 57-hour lockdowns. And so, those best practices have helped us get a handle on the COVID outbreak on Navajo.
Awesome. Thank you. Christian, additional thoughts on resilience and kind of how you've seen our model of resilience and I think connect to the value Mr. Natte's expressed on community and that type of thing.
Yeah, I remember when I first met Mr. Natte, I was in Las Vegas at a conference, and he mentioned the long walk to me. And I went back to my hotel room, looked up the long walk. I'd heard of it, but hadn't really studied it. And when I actually studied it, that example of resilience blew me out of the water. It had a huge impact on me on multiple fronts. And then understanding that and then having the opportunity to work there on the reservation and stuff, it's been incredible. And I'll tell you, I speak on resilience all over this country. And oftentimes I will point out the most resilient people I know are the Native American populations. And it's been a huge honor for me to, I almost hesitate to tell this story because I'm not sure if I was being teased or not, but they gave me an honorary Navajo name, Jason. And I bet you cannot guess my Navajo name, all right? But if I say it, don't, see, he's already laughing. You see that, man? It's Big Thunder is what they gave me this honorary name, had a little ceremony for me at an event. And that was a huge thing, but I noticed they had big smiles on their face at the same time. So Mr. Natte, you got to tell me if that name is, if that's my real name there, right? I need some advice on that. Slide this over here so I can see him as well. All right, I couldn't see his face there for a second. He's smiling big on that. So do y'all remember my name, Big Thunder, or is that gone now? All right.
No, we will. When you come back, we'll address you as Big Thunder.
Big Thunder. All right. I want to make sure I don't lose that. As a speaker, that's good. I've shared that story across the country, and they think it's fitting. But it's, in all seriousness, as I started doing the real, doing some research on this and looking at a few things, then last night I felt some pretty intense emotions because as I was researching, looking at, and I'm very aware and writing the book stuff, these are the number one things you have to be resilient. We know we have to have a strong community. We have to have intact identity. And those two things, we know we're literally we're stripped away from Native American populations. And so if these are some of the biggest X factors that enable us to be resilient, it shows you at what level you guys have had to fight back and work through tremendous opposition. And we're seeing it with COVID, which you were just alluding to, the sacrifice that you guys are going through and you're making through COVID, I think needs to be acknowledged. And so I do encourage everybody to be aware of what's going on with that. And if you don't get anything out of watching this today, I really encourage everybody to really understand that long walk, because everything in that will help you understand why these are the most resilient people on the planet. You alluded to it, and we define resilience as the ability to fight on when you have every reason to give up. And to me, what's been so amazing studying Native American populations as it relates to resilience, and you guys are doing it right now with COVID, you do it with so many things, is your patience and your ability to be flexible and adjust. It's better to be like a palm tree that can, that has some flexibility in it that can adjust. We know a palm tree, when a storm comes in, that tree is gonna last longer. I was talking to Daryl Scott the other day, was mentioning that to me, and you have to have that that flexibility. And I'll be honest, at times, I worry sometimes my Native American brothers and sisters, their flexibility, I worry they're taking advantage. And I know they are taking advantage sometimes because of that kindness, that flexibility. And that's been hard for me to watch, to be frank, at times. But I also know you all realize that's been a survival skill. That's part of your resilience. And that's just me observing. I want to be really clear. Anything I'm saying as relates to any of this stuff, I realize I might be out to lunch on, but those are just some things I've observed. And what are your feelings about what I just shared there? Mr. Natay, do you think that's accurate on the flexibility stuff, or what are your feelings on that?
Christian, I would agree 100% that, in order to be resilient, you have to be flexible, because there are things happening in your environment, in your home life, that you really don't have control over. And so being able to adapt and adjust, that's human mankind, we can do that. But even more so, if you've faced, adversity, you have to be able to be flexible and adjust. It's just like my ancestors, knowing that they may go to Oklahoma, but pleading, I want to go home, and we'll take whatever we get. They were flexible, and they had a vision and a plan, which was we just need to get home and we'll regain our lands. And that's what's happening right now in our area. So Navajo continues to purchase land in our area that becomes available. They have that ability now. So yes, I would agree. Flexibility is huge, a component of resilience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a little bit curious. So our audience right now is kind of a mixed group, and I'm really thrilled about that. We have some people that are working primarily with Native American populations, and then we have other people that are working in education or community situations where they're trying to support individuals, but they may not have as much of a training or background in working with and understanding Native American populations. One of the things I wanted to ask your perspective on, Mr. Natay, I've heard you speak a couple times and you've used the term, and I'm really intrigued by it, historic trauma. And I'm wondering how an understanding of that, and even hearing you talk about the long walk of your ancestors, how does an understanding of that historic trauma help us to support students that we may be serving better that come from Native American populations or Indigenous populations?
Well, I can relate it back to a study done by Mount Sinai, and what they were looking at was the trauma or the impact on the Jewish population with the Holocaust. And what they found was that because of what their ancestors faced, it's found in their DNA. And so it's generational. And so that study, yes, it was only targeting that population. And I know there's research going on now with Native American populations. It is evident that the same applies for Native Americans. So whatever your ancestors face, as far as adverse actions, loss of life, that historical trauma is generational, and it transitions into future generations. Another example of that is the BIA movement, the government coming in, and as Navajos, we're family centered. We even have extended families that we take care of, and so back early on, the government took Navajo kids and relocated them, whether it was to Carlisle Indian School back east, or in Oklahoma, or even Riverside in California. And then even on Navajo, they built a number of bureau schools. And so they would round up the Navajo children, take them away, and put them in boarding schools. And you were told you cannot speak your language. If you did, you were punished. There was a joke that they would cut your hair and just leave a little spot here, and that was the government handle, and that's how they would lead you around. And so parents, in my family, that's how they grew up. And so they experienced that. And so I think that's one reason why we have loss of language, is because they were punished for speaking their language, at least in Navajo. That's my opinion, that's probably why the language is not where it needs to be, in my opinion. But because they faced that historical trauma and the way they were treated, and they were told, do not speak your language, there was a reluctance probably to teach their children. And that's just, the Navajo way of life is you were taught Navajo, and that's all you spoke in the home. And so that's slowly diminished, as we look in where we are today. And so we're trying to preserve our language. And I know every nation is doing that. Every tribal nation is trying to do that, preserve their language. In Navajo, we have a written language, and we do teach it in our schools. I have a Navajo language teacher in every building, if not more at the high school. I have more than one at the high school. And so we try to preserve our language using that opportunity for our students. But that's an example of historical trauma that is out there.
Awesome. Thank you. Christian, do you have any thoughts on that, kind of the connection to trauma, historic trauma and resilience?
Yeah. I've been looking a little bit, been studying some of the historical traumas that relates to families and what it does to cause families, to be torn apart. And sometimes, and Mr. Natte mentioned, around death, what happens in the separation, but what they're also seeing is parenting supports. It has a huge impact on generations, just passing down those parenting supports so parents have the tools. And I saw that as a social worker, that hit me tremendously hard. And then when those parenting supports sometimes aren't there, then that has a huge impact on children's self-esteem, how they see themselves, which leads to higher depression, higher anxiety when that family structure is torn apart. The other thing that hit me hard a little bit, and I was looking at the research, is because of trauma-related events have occurred in the context of receiving help. So sometimes when people from the outside have come in to try to deliver services and have delivered help around mental health and physical services, and a lot of these are government-funded services, and when these were delivered over the years, they were not culturally sensitive, and they were, in some ways, they became harmful and had a big impact on trust. And that's had a huge lasting impact on trauma there, on historic trauma, even when people were trying to do so. That's why it's so important, I think, that there is more sensitivity around understanding, even in the process of giving or doing service. And I'm not expert, just even looking at some of the challenges with COVID, different things, is we have to, it has to start with there. I mean, social work 101 is start where the person is. And so I thought that really opened my eyes, understanding where government funded services were not delivered really well. Mr. Natte, do you have any things you want to comment on that as well? I know I kind of brought that up, maybe that might be not a politically correct thing to talk about, but all the research I was reading, they were pretty hard on that.
Yeah, I would agree, Christian. Government services, when you look at the Treaty of 1868, technically we don't own the land. It's held in trust by the United States. So when we talk about government services and the lack of services, it still exists today. Go back to 1868 in the Long Walk. I mean, they were fed, rancid beef. The grains that they were given had insects in them. They were given blankets with smallpox. I mean, you think about everything they did to try to wipe out the native population. It started there, and it still exists today. I'll give you an example. In the COVID environment right now, my students are starting virtually, at least for the first quarter. And we've gone out and purchased all the laptops and devices for them. But the issue here is, because we're on a reservation, number one, I still have families that, as you may already know, don't have running water, don't have electricity, and let alone infrastructure. I mean, internet. I mean, my home here in Chinle, I get 4 megabytes. That's my internet speed. And so as we venture down the path of virtual learning, that's a huge barrier to provide quality, equitable education to our students. And so how do we do that, and how do we manage that? And so what I'm learning is, because we're still a trustee of the government, in order to develop infrastructure, we have to follow strict government guidelines to expand, like water projects. I mean, we have to go through all these required clearances instead of having the ability to say, okay, I'm going to purchase this land, or this land right here will be withdrawn because it's going to benefit the whole. We have to go through a process, and that's a lengthy process that takes land withdrawal on Navajo takes 5 to 6 years. And so because of all the red tape put in place by government, it still takes a long time just to develop a simple power line, water line, and now we're talking internet. I mean, and so yes, it still exists that we're not we don't have the ability and flexibility to do things that need to be done out here.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I didn't, when I was looking at historic trauma and seeing those ties with government, that really opened my eyes. And I know I will be speaking out more about that when I'm doing different advocacy work. So that's been very helpful to me. The one last thing before we move on real quick, Jason, I just want to emphasize one last thing that I just have had incredible experience sharing. And one of the principles we teach in WhyTry is tearing off labels. And we've gotten, usually a lot of situations we're doing this with kids. We get this tremendous response from kids when we talk about tearing off their labels. But in your community, it's just been amazing there in Chinle to see what happens in the teacher's response and things they've shared with me when we talk about tearing off labels that they've felt like they've carried a lot in the historic trauma around those labels. And we do these activities where we even physically tear off a label. We talk about how our labels have affected us in the past and in the future, how they affect us today. And I'll tell you, one of the most therapeutic moments and life-changing moments for me have been in discussions with the Navajo community about those labels. And it applies to the teachers just as much as the students. I kind of want to be a voice for the teachers right now who have expressed that to me, what that has meant to really look at tearing off those labels.
Thank you, Christian. I'm intrigued. I hope people will continue to look into. I mean, we all know trauma is becoming a much more hot topic right now. We know the impact of exploring results of ACEs assessment and that type of thing. But I think there's a kind of a community ripple effect that concept of historic trauma represents, where it ripples beyond just the individual that was directly impacted, where it impacts their family and even their ancestors in a very real way. And so I think understanding that really can help us, all of us that are trying to support in the best way that we can Native American students that we're working with to understand that. So I appreciate you discussing that. It kind of leads into one of the other things that I'm interested in hearing your perspective on. We've done a fair amount of research on our own model of resilience, and we have some ideas, but I'd be curious your perspective, Mr. Natay, on any connection that you see or overlap that you see between the concept of identity and resilience. Do you see any connection between those two?
It plays a huge role in tying identity and resilience. I mean, one of the most important, and that's why I introduced myself in Navajo, because that's my identity. That's who I am as a Native person, as a Navajo man. And so I think it's very important that you know who you are and where you came from. And that's just something that's been ingrained in me from my grandmother, my mother, that you need to know who you are, remember who you are. No matter where you go in the world, remember where you're from, because as Navajos, one thing that happens is, we have sheep, we're sheep herders, and I grew up as a sheep herder. When a child is born, your umbilical cord is buried in the sheep corral. And the philosophy behind that is you always know where home is. So I have family and relatives that live all over the country, but they always come home, and we can always call Navajo home. We're within the 4 sacred mountains. So to answer your question, Jason, identity is a huge component of resilience. And so that's just something that's generational as far as Navajos are concerned, is we know who we are, we know our primary clans, and I think that adds to the ability to be resilient. As far as identity here in Chinle Unified, our philosophy is we look at educating the whole child. And so our philosophy, if you go to our webpage and read our philosophy, what we want is our students to be able to be resilient. Number one, you seek a higher education or a trade or a skill, and you're able to function in Western civilization, and you're able to come home and be able to sit in the hogan with grandma. And so that's the whole child, is you remember your identity, but yet you can function in the real world. And so that's part of our philosophy. And so it fits perfectly with what you're saying, Jason. Identity, I think, in my opinion, is a huge component of resilience. Knowing who you are and where you came from.
Thank you. Thank you. Christian,
Yeah.
what do you think? Any connection between identity and our model of resilience?
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. We teach street resilience. Those out there that know what street resilience is, it's the ability to take any type of disrespect. People are putting you down. They're focused on what's wrong with you, and even some of your own past mistakes, and use disrespect as a reason to put one foot in front of another, to not give up, to bounce back. And that's why I was kind of encouraging people earlier, man, if you anything get out of this, please read about the Long Walk, understand Navajo history, because the whole history is street resilience. And I'll be frank, I wish I had understood that at the level I do now when I wrote the book, because maybe we'll have this in our edited version, but I would be definitely writing about the street resilience of the people I know in Chinle. They're some of the most street resilient people. I love what you said about, taking that pain, that suffering, going out into the Western world, getting these skills, but then coming back and being able to connect with family and be part of the local community. I think blending those two worlds is so powerful. And, one thing that I think came out in the film, I taught me how to remember the film about the basketball players and stuff is, when I saw those young men have the opposition they have, the challenge they had, that they would go to these other schools, they feel disrespect, but they didn't lose their identity. They knew where they're from. And, the powerful story was they would just run them off the court. They knew where their gifts were. They knew where their abilities were, and they maximized where they stood and their family's history and their sacrifice and what it meant to the community. And that's just a powerful, powerful example. So please see that film. What was the name of that film again? I feel horrible that I don't have it right off the top of my head.
Basketball or Nothing on Netflix.
Basketball or Nothing. See, I love that. That's a street resilient title right there. And so I love that. But just that a person's identity is born in that respect for their ancestors and in their past accomplishments. The accomplishments of the Navajos in World War II. A lot of people think we were able to get through World War II and win World War II because of the ability to, the code breaking that took place, from the Navajos. And, that means a lot to me. My dad was a code breaker at NSA. It was a GS-16 code breaker. And being from a family of code breakers, that is amazing history. And that to me, all that is street resilience, is the ability to say, hey, we've been hurt, we've been disrespected, but we're still going to serve our country, and we're going to serve. And I know there's amazing Navajos that are impacting society, government, sports, all kinds of stuff out there that are making a huge difference. And I think a lot of that is born in that street resilience. And I know every one of my employees that have come back from Chinle, all of their street resilience has increased tremendously. And so that's a gift I know we've gotten from you guys as an organization. And I wish the whole country could learn more about the tremendous stuff the code breakers did and all that stuff. It's amazing. I know you probably want to say something about that as well.
Can I speak to that as well?
Yeah.
I just want to do a shout out for native language in general. And as Christian indicated, the Navajo code talkers were a huge reason why we were able to regain to defeat the Japanese. And so it wasn't only the Navajo code talkers, there are other native languages that were being used at the time. And so that just echoes the powerful tool that we need to regain, which is our language, because it made a huge impact on America. And it, allowed us it made a difference in the world. And so they deserve that shout out. And so I just wanted to echo that as well, Christian.
Thank you for doing that. It's interesting hearing you talk. So within our model, this concept of street resilience Christian mentioned, one of the major studies that actually informed that concept was a study done amongst Native American youth. And they were looking at Native American youth that had lost contact with their elders and their ancestors compared to Native American youth that still had maintained contact. And there was a pretty dramatic resilience difference. The youth that still had connection with their ancestors and their elders scored routinely higher on resilience scales. And what they attributed that to was a sense of identity. And I think the language, as you're describing, preserving and maintaining language, I think that's really implicit to our identity as well. And so it all lines up really nicely with the model that we're teaching. And I love hearing you talk about it, because it really, I think, puts it in nice perspective. So thank you. What I want to get to now, we got about 20-ish, 25 minutes left. There's come up in the chat box a couple times, and this is one of the things that I really wanted to get to, is what advice, and specifically I'm looking to you, Mr. Natay, what advice would you give to educators that may work at schools that aren't primarily Native American schools, maybe to educators that look like me, to help them better support and establish relationships with their Native American and Indigenous students? What can they be doing to really help support those kids?
Well, I think, as you've indicated, I think in any classroom, that ability to connect with any student begins with a relationship. And are you genuine about it? Do you say I care, or do you really care? And our students can pick up on that. Just, people know, it's that sense that we know, well, this individual really cares. And so I look at, like, my students here, because of the low socioeconomic status that we live in, that's what they're looking for in some cases is, does this individual really care about me? And if they make that connection with this teacher, that, wow, this teacher really cares about me, and because she's concerned about my well-being, I'm going to work hard for her. I'm going to go, you know what, I can do this. And so that encouragement, that connection that occurs between a teacher and student is huge. And that's something I always promote in my district is let's start with relationships. If we can begin there and show our kids and demonstrate to them, and they understand and agree that you really care, you're not just here to do a job. You're not just here to collect a paycheck. You're here to really, you really care about my well-being. And so I think it applies across, all nationalities, all races. If a teacher is able to do that, that's my first, that's what I look for, is a teacher that has the ability to make that connection with the student, because then the teaching comes and they'll listen and they'll learn, and they want to learn more. And so, I think it's very important that relationship is established initially with the student. And I look at myself, I grew up in poverty, no running water, no electricity. So I know what it's like. That was how I grew up. But I can remember my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Wake. She made an impact in my life. I didn't come from the best, when I read Christian's book, it made a huge connection with how I grew up. And so that's why I looked at the WhyTry program. I thought this is a good fit for our Native community here in Chinle. But so I can remember those teachers throughout my K-12 career that made an impact. And they're the ones that encouraged me. They're the ones that believed in me. And if it wasn't for them and my ability to get an education, I don't think I'd be where I am right now. And so I think that relationship component is huge for our students.
Thank you. Christian, thoughts?
Yeah, people who are really familiar with WhyTry know we've been teaching surrender the one-up relationship, for the past 22 years, across this country. And, Chinle was the first community I've ever been to where it was naturally built into the community. So it was surrender the one-up, but you let people know they have value and worth because of who they are, and not because of success or failure. And it was just amazing to be around people who naturally, that's a desire to surrender that one-up relationship. Is built in the culture. There's a beautiful, soft love in that community. And I was raised in the African-American community where there's a very passionate, intense, and the love is just as passionate in the Native American community, but it's a very kind, it's a soft love that just, when you feel that connection, it's huge in that community. It's huge with those students, and those kids know if they're in that environment, because many of the adults they're interacting with. So if they're in you know, if these teachers in a white community, I remember these kids go back to their home lives and they're in their community. I just want the white world to understand and the teachers to understand that there's a deep, deep, deep love that's very unconditional. And if a teacher can repeat that when they're working with Native American students or Indigenous students, it's so powerful. The other thing that helps do that as well is being vulnerable, sharing some of your ups and downs, some of your, just being real and saying, look, these are the great things that happened to me. These are some of the bad things that happened to me. And even throwing a little humor there. That's one thing I love about the Native American community, especially the Navajo Nation. I've been crying, laughing so hard because of the fun humor they have. And you blend that humor a little bit in combination with you being vulnerable, they'll run through a wall for you. I mean, they'll be there for you in every aspect. And I just want to be frank. I'm not being too frank, just sharing what I know about that. And that's been an amazing, amazing thing to see. That's also, I think it's really important with Native American communities. We got to respect personal space and time. I mean, personal space and time are huge in those communities, and we have to understand the dynamics of that. And then what else? And then when you're sharing, when you're communicating different messages or ideas, and this is across the board, but particularly powerful in Navajo communities, is through storytelling. And as more of those stories can tie back to ancestors, respect of ancestors, that's a tremendously important thing in that community. I think it's important for all educators to understand that respect of elders as well. And just like all of us, we want to be in an environment where people are focused on what's right with us, not what's wrong with us. And I found that with working with the Indigenous populations is when we really focus on what's right and put an emphasis there, again, you're going to get way more support. They're going to be flexible where you don't understand culturally things, they'll overlook it. And it's fun when I've done training there and been there. At the breaks, they'll pull me aside and go, don't say that again, or don't do that. But I've never, ever felt disrespect. I've only felt love. And the correction was just, hey, we want you to understand where we're coming from. There's no judgment here. And the more, when they go home, they don't experience intense judgment. And so for a white educator to come down with harsh judgment, that's going to demotivate them instantaneously in a classroom, because judgment in those communities are very, very different. The family unit is so strong, and just, you know, the way these moms and dads, man, love their kids is, sorry, it was very similar to what I experienced in the African American community. I think that's where I went back. I was in Chinle. It was emotional for me because I was feeling thousands of Mama Jacksons around me, and that was a powerful experience. So those are the things I think that are really important, and you know, that love, that connection is what's most important. But we need to look to the Navajo Nation if you really want to understand how to surrender the one-up relationship. They give a discourse on it constantly. And I know I've learned a lot more about that. Even after we taught it for 15 years, when I spent time there, I was like, that's what it's about. And when those, especially those elderly women came up to me and just put their arm around me and said, hey, do it this way. This is a better way of doing things. We had to have the humility to just stop and listen, because what we can learn by just stopping and letting the one-upmanship or the being the expert or thinking, because we have more access to resources and different things, that's not okay. We got to stop doing that. And these children pick up on that very, very quick.
Thank you. If it's okay, I might put you on the spot just a little bit, Mr. Natay, and if you want to come back and think about this, but the thought comes to my mind that I think might be helpful. Do you have any advice for ways for non-native educators to try to improve their cultural competency? Like what could they do?
I think it's that's a good question. I think it's their willingness to learn about the environment that they're teaching in. Sometimes I know we feel Native American children are withdrawn and they're quiet, but I think once that relationship is established, you know, are you willing to learn more about your local surrounding, your local environment? Are you willing to go out to a hogan if you're invited and experience that family gathering, that family event. It's the genuineness of wanting to learn more about the local community. And so I think that's one way to make an impact. And the other is, despite being silent or, native people don't look you in the eye, it's not out of disrespect. It's that's just the way we are. And so because of those little nuances, as an educator, you have to believe in them. You got to create that belief that no matter what you're facing at home, no matter what your challenges you have, I believe in you that you can be successful. And I think that's a huge factor in educating Native American students. And I'll give you an example here in my own district. 2014-15, we adopted a new curriculum. Common Core was out there. And we had a pacing guide that we were going to follow. And a lot of the talk was, these kids can't do it. The rigor's too high. The pace is too fast. They can't do it. So that was the belief system in our culture, in our district. But we began to work on that and change that. And so what we found is, if we at least try and believe, we can make a difference. And that's what's led us to be the worst performing Navajo school district on the Navajo Nation to the top performing reservation district in Arizona. And we're demonstrating that closing that achievement gap is possible. And so I have several classrooms across my district, several teachers that are having that vicarious experience of they're exceeding the state average. And so my teachers know we're chasing the top performer because we want to be the top performing district in Arizona. And that's our goal, and we will get there. So again, when you hear me talk, it's always positive. It's not, well, we might, we may, it's we will. And so that belief system is huge, I think, in a Native community that, it is possible. It can be done. I mean, every year I have students graduating that are going to Ivy League schools on full ride scholarships. And so it is possible. And so again, my story about, I tell this to my staff, of the 200 graduates we have every year, my vision and my dream is 20 of them come back, whether they learned a new trade, whether they have higher education, they come back as teachers, they come back as social workers, they come back as in place of me as a superintendent. That's how we change what's happening on Navajo, and that's how we change the socioeconomic status as they come home and they help. And so I tell that to my staff all the time, is that's what we need to happen, and that's how we're going to make a difference in our community. So again, it goes back to the belief, and I'm a firm, I push that all the time, that we got to believe in our students because they can and will be successful.
I love that. That's a great lead in to a couple of questions that have pretty consistently come up in the chat box. And by the way, thank you everybody for your participation. A couple questions have come up regarding two things that I think are similar. One, I think people are genuinely interested about some of the things that you did to help close that gap. There's a lot of populations out there that are still struggling, probably where you were a few years ago. And then the other questions that have come up have been around, what are you doing right now to navigate the COVID challenges? What specific strategies would you have that you'd be willing to share or brag on in both of those areas? Because I think a lot of people, a lot of educators are really hurting and are really, really anxious right now, wondering, how they can do some of the things that you've done. What would you be willing to share from a practical strategy standpoint?
Well, I think first and foremost, as a district or any organization, you have to have a plan. And so we developed a strategic plan, and we involved all stakeholders. And so we created our vision, and our vision is to empower all students to be competitive, unique, successful, and driven through an effective team of teachers, staff, parents, school board, and community in an environment dedicated to the value of continuous learning. That's our vision. I have second grade classrooms that can recite that vision. So we're all walking the talk. We're all believing in our strategic plan. We all know that we're going to be successful. That's one key. The other, we're very fortunate here in Chinle. I have 2 academic coaches in every building that help our educators. So professional development is a huge component of that, so that everybody's on board. When I first started, I have 7 schools, 7 campuses. We were all going different directions. You could go in one building and your third grade teacher is teaching one way, and that same third grade teacher in another classroom is doing something totally different. And so we aligned all of that. We aligned our curriculum. And so now my student can go from any one of my 5 elementary schools anytime in a given year, and because we're all doing the same thing. And so I think professional development, the aligned curriculum is another key to our success. And then resources, we go after any resource out there. And so, you know, those are the things that we do in our district to make a difference here in Chinle. And so for teachers that are looking for a job, you know, we're always looking, and we're one of the top paying districts in the state of Arizona. Just want to give that, to let you know that.
We're going to put your website up so that people can check out a little bit. Would you be willing to share? I know I've heard you talk a little bit about some of the strategies you've put in place for what you had to pivot to, obviously in a very rural, or you said remote area, when you had to switch over to the virtual model. What are some of the strategies that you put into place there? Because I think those were really, really useful as well.
Well, what we're doing, because of the lack of connectivity, and we know that some students aren't going to, no matter what we do, they're not going to have connectivity. So some of the strategies we have are all the lessons are going to be recorded. And so for those students that don't have connectivity, we will download them on a flash drive and deliver it to their home. That's one strategy we're doing. The other is we are strategically parking buses with Wi-Fi access in the community. And so, you know, that's another strategy that we're doing. The other is we've not only purchased devices, so we're a one-to-one district, but we've also purchased 1,000 hotspots for students that are high need, don't have the ability to pay for that connection. And so we've provided that to those students that have connectivity in their area, because that's still a challenge. There's a number of dead zones in our community. So that's another. And then last but not least, we've expanded the Wi-Fi in our parking lots. So for those parents or students that can get to Chinle or their campuses, they'll have access via the parking lot Wi-Fi as well. And then last but not least, if we can't reach them, we'll use paper packets. So those are the strategies that we're going to be implementing with the virtual environment.
Thank you, thank you. Christian, thoughts on any of those strategies that Mr. Natte shared?
No, those are awesome. I just noticed a school counselor, they popped up and said there's school counseling jobs there in Chinle as well. So if you're a school counselor in any of the Western states, I've been to this community several times, I cannot think of a more fulfilling experience being a school counselor in Chinle. Please check that out. I think that would be an incredible opportunity, especially if you're a school counselor there in Arizona. How you'd be treated and the respect you'd have and the impact you'd have would be tremendous. So I kind of want to put a shout out to all my mental health workers out there, even across this country, man. Let's get resources to Chinle there. And if anybody's a mental health worker, please reach out to Chinle to support them in their education system, because you'd be a part of something really special. The one thing that I've gotten feedback from adults and children there in Chinle that's been really powerful is just the concept. We teach the thing on a battery, what you do with your negative and positive emotions, that there's no law in the universe that says you cannot take negative emotions and do something productive with them. And the Navajo people have done that for hundreds of years, and it's been amazing to see what happens when the kids catch the vision of that. And that's part of that language. And you know, what you've done to get that universal language is amazing. Those kids don't wake up feeling guilt and shame because they know, hey, I might feel sad today, but I can do something productive with it. I may feel a little depressed today, but you know what? I can still be a good daughter, a good son, a good student. And it's been fun to just talk to the community here, how that mentality has impacted children and families. So I want to thank Quincy for making that happen, and all of this stuff that's been there. It's been amazing to see what you guys have done. And
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. I have one last question. Maybe we could finish out on that kind of comes to mind. Obviously, these kids don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of a family. They're part of a community. They're part of a school. They're part of a team. What type of things or advice would you recommend that maybe you've done? Because I would imagine that you're having to deal with trying to support entire families, not just students. These students, especially in these remote areas, it's not just the student that's being impacted, it's the whole family. Are you doing anything specific to try to provide kind of educational and academic support kind of around the whole family beyond just the student?
Well, we're going, you know, because of the virtual environment, we're going to have to rely on parent support in some instances. And so we will be developing training videos for them. Mental health is huge. Social emotional learning is huge. So our first week of school, which starts next week, the whole week we're going to be focusing on social emotional learning just to kick the year off and try to identify if there are any needs out there in our community so that with the limited resources we have in the district as well as the community resources, how can we help them and get them out there? So that's one area of support that we're going to be focusing on when we start the school year. The second area is in our community, you know, 60% unemployment, food insecurity is huge. So we've partnered with a local food bank and every month I give a food bag to every child. So if I have 5 kids in my district, attending my district, I get 5 food bags a month. And then in addition to that, we do monthly produce distributions, fresh produce distribution, and that's to anybody. You don't have to be a student of mine. And so, you know, those are some of the programs that we've implemented to help with the family environment because of the food insecurity is rampant in my community, and so we're addressing that basic need that we sometimes take for granted. You know, that there's not enough food to go around, and so those are some of the support areas that we provide. I have 2 social workers in my district that provide support services to create that bridge between the Navajo Nation, the government social worker program, and our students. So we identify students and we provide that support out there. We have homeless kids. We have a program to try to address some of their needs. And so, you know, again, it goes back to knowing your community, knowing the needs, and how do you leverage resources that are available to get them into your community to help and support them in any way that's possible.
Thank you. I love that. I love that concept of leveraging resources, trying to get the most out of them. And I think you all are a great example of that. We're right up on the hour. About time to finish up. Parting thoughts. What are what parting thoughts would you have? I'm going to go to Christian first, and then come to you, Mr. Natte. Christian, parting thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a lot of hope, and one of the questions we were going to look at, maybe get into, but I just want to hit a little bit is how we see these kids right now that are going to be graduating. This current generation, I think, is graduating right now. They really want to go into some type of service-oriented field, even across the board in America. We're seeing that, and as I've talked to several, 11th graders, 12th graders, they're in Chinle, their interest in investing back in the community, turning back in, and making a difference, I think gives me hope that I think your community is going to continue to evolve, and the seeds that you've planted right now in combination with the kids who are continuing their education and looking at different opportunities to be able to come back and invest in the community there, I think it's going to be tremendous over the next, even 10 years. I think it's going to be unbelievable. And so I'm excited about that. So that gives me some hope. And I think this is a special generation that, because they're seeing firsthand inequality across this country, they're seeing some of the challenges in their own community. And I think this current generation is like, hey, we got to make changes. We know basic needs need to be met. People have to have access to clean water, to food. We have to deal with poverty issues, inequality issues. And the awareness of these kids, as I have conversations with them right now, is unbelievable. And that is in their, we're in crisis. They have to grow up faster. That's one of the realities and pains of this world. But I think there's something special with this current generation that's going to really, really have an impact. And I think it's already happening there in Chinle. And I think it's going to continue to do it. I wish we could put more of a spotlight on prioritizing poverty issues and what role education plays. And I think, Mr. Natte, over the next few years, you're going to have we got to get your voice out to a lot more people. And just seeing the comments here, I see a lot of people agree with that while we've been talking. And so we got to get your voice amplified to many more people. I think no different than World War II, where y'all came in with some solutions because of the pain, because of the suffering, because of all the things y'all been through, and then the uniqueness about your incredible culture with language and the heart and the service. I think this country, even though we have a history of letting you guys down, I think we're going to need your leadership, your insights to help America be a much greater place. And I think the role that you guys will play will be significant in that. And thank you for all that. And thank you for your time, and thanks for believing in me early in my career. You know, you believed in me many years ago, and I never take that for granted. So thanks for seeing the good in me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Natte, parting thoughts, what's giving you hope right now as we work into the future, and any closing remarks?
Okay. Well, first, let me begin by, again, thanking the WhyTry program, Jason and Christian, for giving me this opportunity to share some of, the stories that are happening in Chinle, the positive stories that are happening. You know, this platform, as you've indicated, I think will inspire people that, anything is possible. And to speak about hope, you have to believe, and you have to believe that there's something better out there, and hope that it will happen. In my district, we say it will and it shall. We don't speak in terms of could or should or may. It's we will. And so I think, creating that belief system in your organization is huge. And so if you're able to move the masses and get them on board, I think you can do some great things in your communities, in your districts. And so, we're still on the beginning phases of getting that reality here, but it's something we're sticking our guns to. We're not deviating from it. It's a constant message, stay the course, because it can and will happen. And I think you got to have that positive belief system to make it happen. And so, in any community, it can happen. And so I think hope is a critical part of that. And so again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this has been awesome. My heart is really full right now, just hearing these stories and being able to be a part of this. So I appreciate both of your insights. For those that have been asking, we did record this. We're going to get a link out for it. I'm going to put up a slide here in just a minute, if it's okay, with a link to to the Chinle Unified School District, and then we've got contact information for us. Everybody give a big virtual round of applause to Christian and to Mr. Natte. Thank you so much. This was really fun, and I hope we can keep this dialogue going and continue to support all of our students that may feel underrepresented or misunderstood, and really try to continue to help these kids out. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon, and look forward to seeing you all soon.